Mark chapter 6, verses 45 to 56. Immediately, he made his disciples, and this is verse 45, get into the boats and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida. Bethsaida is house of fishermen. While he dismissed the crowd, and after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. For this, they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat, and with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. My sermon today is Jesus walks on the water. And you see in this picture his favorite teaching place on the shores of the Lake of Galilee, or the Sea of Galilee. It's a very big lake. Jesus walks on water. The outline is in three parts. Sermon is in three parts. First, I will talk about the amazing things that Jesus does. And then the disciples and the people react differently to those amazing things. And finally, what stops you from seeing the real Jesus? Let's look at the map of this scene. Some of us have been there, not all of us. So there is this big lake that is called the Sea of Galilee and a few other names. Now, Jesus, last week we read of it, Jesus had finished feeding the 5,000 and teaching them. And he was teaching on the shores of this lake. We don't really know exactly where, yeah? But my guess is somewhere where you see the word Gergesa, that's a place. It's the remote area. Some scholars think it's near Bethsaida, but we don't know. Okay, but anyway, just some geography first. The widest part of the lake or the sea, the inland sea, is Gergesa to Tarichea, which is 13 kilometers. So that's the widest part. And the boat that we're going to read about, we just read about, was somewhere actually near the shore. It wasn't even very close to the middle of the lake, which is right here, right? Deepest part. So they were going from here, maybe around here somewhere, and going to Bethsaida, which is here. So go to the other side. So from this point of view, it's like the other side. Yeah, it's a very big lake. So it's not the other side as here, but from here to here, the other side. So they were aiming for this place, Bethsaida. And where did they end up? In verse 52, I think. We were told they ended up somewhere else. Okay, where did they end up? They ended up at Gennesaret. So way off course. Way off course. How did they do that? They are very experienced fishermen. They know the sea. At least four of the disciples are fishermen on the sea. So what happened? So in verse 45, Jesus sends his disciples to Bethsaida. And in verse 53, we are told they ended up in Gennesaret, blown off course by strong winds. And probably these were the winds blowing up here from the heights of Golan, the Golan Heights, down onto the lake and blowing them away from the shore, this way. Okay, from here to here, this way. So they ended up here. So that's the background, the geographical background. And with that picture in mind, I love maps, some of you don't. And never mind, let's just imagine that lake, yeah, and they're trying to get across to the other side. Now, Jesus, we're told in verse 45, made his disciples, he compelled them, he said, you go. And then they left. And then he went to dismiss the crowd of 5,000. And then he went up, verse 46, to the top of the mountain to pray. And it's a very important time for him to commune with his Father God, with our Father God, and he decided that he needed to do that alone. So he had time with God because he was going to have some very important missions to do ahead. And we are told in verse 47, when evening came. So evening here would be maybe near sunset, perhaps even just after sunset. So it was late, the crowds had been dismissed, they had been fed, and now the boat is out on the sea, and from his vantage point on the mountaintop, Jesus could look down. It's a small lake after all. He could see them, the disciples, struggling away. And even though it's night, there is some light, perhaps moonlight, but also because in verse 48, we are told it's the fourth watch, which is the Roman way of keeping time. The fourth watch is between 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So it's nearly dawn. So the sun is rising up, and there is some light reflecting off the waters of the lake. And at the very least, you could see the silhouette of the boat struggling through the storm. So Jesus, in the dim light, perhaps sees the struggles of the disciples against the wind and the wave. And the wind coming down from the Golan Heights is very strong. And the waves are very high. It's not a rainstorm, it's a windstorm. And so the disciples don't make any progress. We are told they were making headway painfully. They were struggling, they were rowing, and they were rowing against the wind. As you know, we saw from the map, they were trying to get this way, and they ended up this way. And the whole trip would have been at least 8 to 10 hours, I think. Because what happens is this, they are leaving, Jesus make them leave about evening. That's about sunset, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. And by the time Jesus sees them struggling, it's 4 a.m., 3, 4 a.m. Maybe 5, maybe 6. I mean, let's say 5. So from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., it's a long time. It's 10 hours. And where are they? Still in the middle of the lake. They haven't made any progress. And the distance is about 13 kilometers from one side to the other side, but because of their, their deviation, they probably are traveling about the same distance to Gennesaret. And they're only halfway through, 6, maybe 8 kilometers. Less than 1 kilometer per hour. So in this scenario, Jesus does 5 amazing things in this storm. He sees them and he decides to go and help them. Maybe he's finished praying, but maybe he hasn't. But he sees them and he says, I got to go help them. So he decides to walk on the water towards them. That's the fastest way to get to them. Verse 48, he's walking on the water and he catches up with them. Despite their 8-10 hours head start. His walking is faster than the rowing. Is it possible? Yeah, if you walk fast, it's about 3 kilometers per hour. And there's a rowing less than 1 kilometer per hour. So he caught up with them. But it's still amazing. First amazing thing, he walks on water. And second amazing thing, he catches up with them even though they have a 10-hour head start. The third amazing thing, we hear this and sometimes we may be surprised ourselves. He's walking towards them, he's determined, he sees them struggling and he determines to walk to them. Then we are told very strangely, Mark says, he meant to pass them by. He meant to walk away from them. What was he trying to do? I thought he was coming to help them. Why is he walking away from them, passing them by, overtaking them? Well, I think many scholars have puzzled about this, and I think the best explanation is really from the Old Testament. The Old Testament language in many parts, and I give two examples from Exodus 33 and from 1 Kings 19, when Moses says, God, I want to see you. God says, you cannot see me, because if you see me, you die. But I will pass by and you see my back. I will pass by. God will reveal himself to Moses personally. And Elijah asked for the same thing, and God says, I put you in the cleft of the rock. That's why I love singing that song, The Cleft of the Rock. Elijah was put in the cleft of the rock so that he will be sheltered as God passes by. So I think Jesus wasn't meaning to prank them or to, abandon them. He was using, Mark is using Old Testament language to say God passed by, meaning God revealed himself to them. So Jesus revealed himself to them because he was going to show them that he is God. And he sees them terrified. Verse 50 says, they cried out, actually they screamed. Can you imagine big, strong, burly fishermen screaming in fear? That's how frightened they were. They thought they saw a ghost. And like all fishermen, I'm told they're very, very superstitious people because they face the seas, they face the dangers of the seas, and they're very superstitious people. They're always living in danger. So they saw the ghost and they were terrified. And Jesus says, calm down, cool, chill. Do not be afraid. It is I. And in the Greek, the words used are ego, eimi. Ego, English word now, it's from the Greek root ego, I. So when you're egoistic, it's all about I, yeah, ego. So ego, eimi, it is I am who I am. The words ego, eimi are used to translate from the Hebrew to the Greek, the words of God in Moses, in Exodus chapter 3, when he talked to Moses. Moses says, what is your name? And God says, I am who I am. Ego, eimi are the words used to translate I am who I am. Is Jesus giving them a clue who he is? Because God's name, Exodus 3, verse 14, is ego, eimi. I am who I am. Yahweh, Yehovah. And the fifth amazing thing, Jesus gets into the boat and the wind stops. Verse 51. Now remember, this is the second storm miracle. The first storm miracle in chapter 4, Mark chapter 4, Jesus says to the wind and the waves, two words. And the wind died and the waves died. He had control over the winds and the waves, and the surprise. The disciples were amazed, they were astounded. And the same thing happens here again in verse 51. They were astounded again. They were amazed. But the wind stops. Is Jesus giving them another clue as to who he is? He walks on water. One clue. He says, ego, eimi. Second clue. He gets into the boat and the wind stops. They have been struggling for 10 hours and the wind stops just like that. So the miracle, I think, was not a gimmick. Jesus was not into gimmicks or magic shows. He wasn't doing a prank. And teenagers nowadays, they prank each other all the time, right? Not that it's just nowadays. I remember as a very mischievous schoolboy, I was pranking my friends all the time too. So it's not new. But Jesus wasn't pranking them. He had a serious lesson for them. He was teaching them. He watches them and he cares for them. So even though they're struggling in the storm, not making any headway, he's looking at them. He says, now it's time for me to go help. So he's struggling for 10 hours and they're not getting anywhere. I think this is a quick lesson to us that God watches over us in our storms. We think he's far away. He's not. He's watching. And he'll come to rescue at the right time. In the darkest time of our night, in the deepest waters of our lives, we think we're going to sink. In another gospel, Peter actually walks on the water. He gets so challenged by seeing Jesus. He's so enthusiastic. He starts walking on the water and he sinks. We haven't got enough faith, even when Jesus says, come, join me, walk on the water with me. Well, we don't always have to walk on the water. We can stay in the boat. Just know that Jesus will get into the boat and we will be rescued because he cares. So who is Jesus? The theme of this series of messages I'm giving is, who is Jesus? Do you see who he is? The disciples don't. So the disciples and the people react differently. The disciples screamed. They were terrified, verse 50 and verse 49. They thought Jesus was a ghost and they were astounded, verse 51. And verse 52, they did not understand. They did not understand what was happening. Clueless. Despite the fact that in Mark chapter 4 and 5, we have read and they have seen that Jesus was healing and exorcising, and some of it from a distance, and they themselves were involved in the healing ministry and they didn't understand. Jesus calmed the storm with 2 words in Mark chapter 4 and they didn't understand. Jesus fed 5,000 people just not too long ago, a few hours ago, Mark 6, and they don't understand. They could not see the connection between the feeding of the 5,000, and the storm miracles, the 2 of them. And then later on, we're going to read another feeding of 4,000, and they still didn't understand. Now, how slow can you be? Yeah. So they are slow. They don't see. Can you see? Now, perhaps we can't blame the disciples for being clueless, right? Well, first of all, people don't walk on water, except in Canada. At this time, I think the ice is probably 24 inches thick. I used to before COVID, bring students out for ice fishing. And they say, you got to wait till the ice is 12 inches thick at least, and the snow is another 12 inches, 24 inches to drill through. And of course, it can support a whole truck. Huge, big 2-ton, 5-ton truck, and it doesn't break the ice. So yeah, in Canada, I love being in Canada. I walk on water here. But this is Galilee. The water is not ice. It is water. Even if it's winter, it is liquid water. Jesus walks on it. So don't blame the disciples for being shocked and astounded. And secondly, not only is he walking on liquid water, he was walking easily through a fierce storm. The wind is blowing and he's making headway, and the boat is not making headway. Can you see the contrast? Jesus is walking and he's walking faster than the boat. Amazing. He's given the boat 10 hours head start and he's catching up. Even without a storm, people don't walk that fast, I think. Maybe you're young and Johnson probably can. And maybe with a bit of running and jogging, he will catch up with the boat. But Jesus, oh well, Jesus is quite young around this time. He's about 30 years old. So yeah, maybe a young man could do that. Still amazing, right? And fourthly, the windstorm stopped. Immediately he got into the boat. That's amazing too. And in Mark chapter 4, the disciples, when they saw the wind and the waves stop, they said, who is this? They were stunned. So if Jesus is not a ghost, who is Jesus? How is he able to do all these amazing things? So no wonder the disciples were shocked and terrified, and then they were astounded, and then they were puzzled. They did not understand. And Mark explains why in verse 52. He says their hearts were hardened to the obvious. They couldn't see the obvious. Like the hearts of the Pharisees. The Pharisees' hearts were hardened. We know that. So how could the disciples have hearts that are hardened? And this is where we need to remind ourselves we cannot be presumptuous. Just because we are followers of Jesus doesn't mean we see everything, we understand everything about God. Sometimes our hearts are hardened because we don't see the obvious. Jesus was giving so many clues and they were clueless. So can you see it? In the Bible, a heart that is not responsive to God's working is called a hardened heart. A heart that refuses to see evidence when God is present. And Jesus basically said to the Pharisees, you see God working and you credit it to the devil, Beelzebub. You are hardened in your hearts and you have blasphemed against the Holy Spirit. You credit the devil for work done by God. That's how hard your heart is, and you will not be forgiven. So a hardened heart. Have you got a hardened heart? Is your heart hardened? Mark gives us a contrast between the disciples who are supposedly the in-group, right? They are the insiders. They have personal privilege of being with Jesus all the time. In contrast, the people are the crowds outside. They are outsiders. The people see Jesus. They see him in action. They are not disciples of Jesus. But when they see Jesus, how did the people respond? Verse 54 tells us immediately they recognized him. Know who Jesus is. Before the age of Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, they recognize him. They didn't have to see a viral video of him. And when they see him and recognized him, what did they do? They ran. They ran to see him. They ran. It wasn't walk. It wasn't crawl. They ran to see him. And they gathered all the sick people they could find and they brought them to Jesus. They had urgency. They had a sense of urgency. Jesus is not going to stay around for a long time. Let's get it done now. So they had a sense of urgency. And at least they understood what Jesus could do for them. Jesus could heal them. Jesus could heal their loved ones. So they had urgency to come and see Jesus. And they did that because they knew he cared. Out on the lake, the disciples probably thought Jesus was abandoning them. Go away. And then he goes on the mountain to pray. He doesn't care about us. He tells us to go into the storm. We are in this storm. Why? Because Jesus told us to come into this storm. And that's another area we have to stop being presumptuous about. Just because God sends us somewhere doesn't mean we will not face storms. My wife and I, Dorothy, we know that God sent us here to Canada. And this is our 14th year in Canada. We thought we wouldn't be here for long, maybe 4 years. It's now 14. And we have had many, many storms in these 14 years. We are confident that God sent us here, and yet we had so many storms. But we know he cares, and we have conquered every storm because he conquered the storms for us. The poor people in the crowd, they have got lots of problems. They've got lots of sick people, and they don't have privileged access to Jesus. So they decided to wait for him in the marketplaces. They took the sick and they waited in the marketplaces. Why? They were waiting for Jesus to pass by. But why marketplaces? Because they understand that Jesus wants to speak to the crowds, and he would be going where there would be crowds, and crowds would be at marketplaces. So they understood the mind of Jesus. Even though they were outsiders, they were really not believers at all. So you can see the contrast sometimes. Believers don't get it, but non-believers get it. They know Jesus is going to be at the marketplace. Let's go there before he's there. Let's go there before the crowds gather. You know, it's like Boxing Day sale. It opens at maybe 9 a.m. Some people are outside the shop at 6 a.m., right? You get there before the crowd. So they were there. And when they saw Jesus, they implored him, they begged him, verse 56, please let us just touch your clothes. You don't need to come near. You're too busy, right? While the disciples were terrified and shocked by the miracles of Jesus, and they got hardened hearts as a result, the people believed and they acted. They brought the sick to Jesus. And their faith was so strong, they did not even ask for Jesus's personal attention. They just said, give us the privilege of just touching your clothes. They knew he would be too busy, too many people to take care of. So we don't want to take the time, Jesus. Don't want to bother you. Just let us touch you. They were not too proud to beg Jesus, please let us come near to you. Just let us touch the fringe of your clothes. The fringe is just the sides of the clothes. And of course, Jesus, being a rabbi, he would have a shawl. You see pictures of rabbis on the shawls. He's got a long shawl, and the shawl is a long tassels. Yeah, just let me touch a tassel. And Jesus granted them their wishes. Verse 56. They touched and they were healed. Verse 56 gives us a small little insight into another problem. So not all the people who are non-believers believed and acted. As many as touched implies that some didn't touch. Yeah? As many people as touched him, they got healed. But the ones who didn't touch, they didn't get healed. So as many people as touched Jesus. Big crowd, some touched, some didn't. Why not? Too shy to draw near? Maybe some of us are too shy to draw near Jesus. Jesus, you're such a big, important person. I'm too small to come near to you. I remember my days as a member of parliament, and people think this is a big shot. I'm not even a minister, you know, not the prime minister. And they feel so shy to come near me because you're a big man. I'm not a small man. I'm a small woman. Don't come near me. And when I go near them, they are so delighted. Sometimes you don't need to be a member of parliament. Sometimes pastors, as a pastor, I still get that. Just how you feel so pleased that I approach you first. Maybe they were too shy to draw near Jesus. I hope they were not too lazy. Some are just too lazy to move. You know, the crowds are too big. It's too much trouble to get to the front. Forget it. I got better things to do. I've got other priorities than Jesus. Maybe they are not believing. They don't believe still. They don't care. Maybe they're not sick enough. I think if they're sick enough, desperate enough, you go to anything, yeah? Even if somebody says, I will send you holy water and you'll be healed, you say, yeah, send me some. Because you're sick enough to desperately try anything. So maybe they were not sick enough. You don't think you have any sin, so you don't need Jesus. I was just giving a lesson this Friday about sins. We had a Apostles' Creed lesson on sin. And in Korean, sin is 죄. In Japanese, it's tsumi. In Chinese, it's 죄. And the kanji for tsumi is the same as the Chinese character 죄. And what is that? When a Chinese or a Japanese or a Korean looks at 죄 and 죄, or tsumi, they think straight away of crime. Crime. I have lived my life without stealing. I've lived my life without cheating anyone. I have not murdered anyone. Why do I have 죄? I don't have any tsumi. So I don't need God. I'm not sick enough. In fact, I'm well, so I don't need to be healed. What stops you from seeing the real Jesus? Jesus continues to draw crowds today. Pre-COVID have always been rallies, and you see stadiums being filled with people curious. Some of them are not interested, they're just curious. Or maybe they want to just humor a friend. Friend says, come with me to the rally, and they go. So Jesus continues to draw crowds, and he continues to do miracles in the lives of Christians and others. Not just Christians, you know. If you see a miracle, do you recognize it? Or do you ignore it? Do you give some justification for it and you move on? Miracles can be explained away, and there are, sadly, even so-called Christians who try to explain away the miracle. Some scholars will look at this passage of Jesus walking on the sea and they say, oh, actually it was an optical illusion, you know. It's nighttime and the lights are dim, and actually Jesus was walking on a sandbar. And they thought he was walking on water. So they try and justify and explain away the miracle. Now, these are fishermen, at least 4 of them. They know where the sandbars are. If they see Jesus walking on the sandbar, you think they don't know it? You think they will be shocked? No, they won't be. If you see me walking on water in Canada in winter, deep winter, would you be shocked? No, because you know I'm walking on ice. So these scholars see a miracle here and they explain it away. God have mercy on them. Are you too proud to see your need for Jesus? You don't have any trade. You don't have any trade. Don't sue me. Nothing at all. Your life is perfect. I want to tell you a story of a friend of mine in my church in Singapore. She had a liver tumor and she was really scared. And she had 3 tests. First of all, it was an ultrasound and there was a growth. And doctor said, well, maybe it's not, you know, ultrasounds are not accurate. They did an X-ray. X-ray showed the tumor again. So, okay, you know, but sometimes there are shadows on the X-ray and you think it's tumor. So let's go for an MRI. That's, you know, the best technology we can have. And so she went into the MRI room and then she was prepared for it and she went into the machine. And as she went into the machine, in the dark room of the MRI, the nurses and all are behind shields. You know, they have to make sure they're not affected by the magnetic rays. And so my friend Mary is inside this machine going in, and she saw a man in a white cloak with, she says, with brown stripes straight down, coming towards her, reached out his hand into her body and took away something and disappeared. And she came out of the MRI room and she told the doctor and the nurses, Jesus came and took away my tumor. You don't need to operate on me anymore. He's taken it away. I saw him take it away. Doctor is a Christian. Doctor says, Mrs. Chia, sorry, we know you saw, and I'm a Christian, I believe in miracles, but I'm a doctor still as a professional. I still need to operate because we see the tumor, ultrasound scan, X-ray, MRI scan, all there. So we need to operate, sorry. They operated and they couldn't find the tumor. And of course, she said, I told you so, right? And her faith is magnified. Her faith is, it grows and magnifies God. And so she saw Jesus take away the room, the tumor in the room, and she has been telling the story ever since. And one of those people who heard that story was my brother-in-law, Alex. Non-Christian at that time. He had been baptized as a kid, but you know, he really hasn't been to church and he doesn't believe, and he smokes packets and packets and he drinks and all that. So he didn't believe in Jesus. But then a doctor said to him one day, you have a tumor. And he was dead scared. He was terrified. He was only in his 40s, young children, my nephew and my niece to take care of. So he says to Jesus, yeah, he had a bargain with Jesus. Jesus, if you take away my tumor, just like you took away Mary's. I will believe in you. And praise be to God, Jesus took away his tumor, and now my brother-in-law Alex is a devout Christian. Jesus did it for him. True story. Not from a book, which a lot of non-Christians say it's like literature. It's fiction. No, Mary is not fiction. She's a real life person. She's still alive. Alex, my brother-in-law, is still alive. You can go see him. Come visit me in Singapore. Now here in Canada, my friend Royston has a friend with one leg shorter than the other, he tells me. And they prayed for him, all the Christians, and his legs became the same length. One leg shorter than the other, and he's limping. And then they prayed for him, and the legs became the same length. What do you think his reaction was, his response was? Was it like Mary's and Alex? Sadly, no. He refused to recognize that this healing was from God. Impossible healing like that, even the doctors can do it, right? The doctors would have to put in screws and a steel extension and whatever to make it the same length. And this was just by prayer. And he refuses to believe. So you see, miracles don't always produce faith. And we sometimes try and say, oh God, if only you could do this miracle, and then my mother, or my brother, or my sister would believe. I can tell you it doesn't, because when Dorothy had a cancer 40 years ago, she thought that was one way to get her mother back to Christ. Her mother had become a Christian and backslidden and never going to church anymore. And then at age 34, Dorothy had this cancer. And she prayed, and her friends prayed, Yeah, she was desperate too. Everybody praying for her. And she says, yeah, come pray for me. But she prayed. She had faith that God will heal her. And she says, God, take away my tumor, just like, she didn't know about Alex and Mary then, but just take it away, like some of my friends say you can do. Just take away the tumor, and then my mother would be so stumped she would believe. The reality was God didn't take away the tumor from prayer. God took away her kidney, in fact, because it was a kidney cancer. She took away the kidney. The doctors took away the kidney. And that was how God worked that miracle, because today she's still alive 40 years later, surviving on one kidney. And she even had a daughter born, gave birth, brought to full birth, a daughter of ours. So God doesn't have to do miracles the way you do it, but when it happens, you must be able to recognize it. But knowing too that God says miracles don't always produce faith. And you will see from the Gospels, Mark is what we are following. After feeding 5,000 and after feeding 4,000, there are 9,000 people. You would think 9,000 people saw a miracle and they believed, right? 9,000 believers. Yet, when we read Acts chapter 1, Jesus is resurrected. Jesus died and he's resurrected, and they're waiting for the moment of Pentecost, right? Because he says, the Holy Spirit will come, and then I will send you into Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and all the ends of the earth. And in Acts chapter 2, of course, the Holy Spirit came down and what we call Pentecost happened. But in Acts chapter 1, they said the Christians gathered together in the upper room to pray. How many people were there praying? The Christians. How many Christians were there? It was small enough group to be in a room, but it was a big room, 120 people. What happened to the 800, whatever? You do the math. More than 8,000 people out of the 9,000 people did not believe Jesus at all. Only 120 believed, and believed long enough to wait for Pentecost to come. Do you find it too hard to understand Jesus? You accompany the disciples, found it very hard to understand. And the 9,000 found it very hard to understand. Or are you too lazy to even bother to ask someone because you don't understand, but you don't want to ask because it's too lazy or too proud to ask somebody to explain to you what you don't understand? And more than asking people, do you ask God to help you understand? When I became a Christian, I was in the privacy of my own bedroom. No human being knew. And I just asked God, I don't understand what I read. Can you please explain to me? And God says, very easy. Go to a bookshop, Christian bookshop, and buy some Christian books. And you can read the books. I love reading books. That's a good idea, God. And I did that. We read in the Gospels that the disciples took a long time understanding, despite all the miracles that happened in their presence and keep happening and happening and happening. But at least they kept following Jesus. Some people give up. And they kept asking questions. Some people give up. And because they kept asking and they kept following, one day they finally understood. So it's not a waste of time to keep on following Jesus, because thanks to the slow learners, the 12 slow learners, we finally have the privilege of seeing Jesus and believing in him and knowing him 2,000 years later. So don't look down on slow learners. Yeah, sometimes slow learners can teach us things. And we read the eyewitness accounts in the Bible and we can examine the truths for ourselves now. Can you see the real Jesus in these pages of the Bible that we read? Or are you refusing to see? Your heart is hardened. You don't want to see. What stops you from seeing the real Jesus? Because he still does amazing things, real life amazing things. The disciples and the people react differently. I mean, if you have time to sit down with me, I could tell you so many miracles that God has done in my life, in my wife's life, in my family's life. Real life miracles. Things I don't expect. Not just the kidney cancer, but many, many other things. It could be the disciple. Even the insider makes wrong conclusions. It could be the people. What is your reaction? Is it of belief or is it unbelief?